next, I would like to ask Randy Bagwell to come forward. And again, representing another one of our sponsors, and I think the American Red Cross, before Randy's time, also joined us in 2012, if I recall, or thereabouts. And again, they've been a very gracious sponsor and generous sponsor over the years. And of course, today's lecture is named in honor of Clara Barton. How Herman got the Clara Barton Lecture is beyond me. Yeah, I know. But at any rate, so I've asked Randy to come forward to tell us a little bit about the American Red Cross's program, and of course to introduce our guest speaker this evening. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you. So thank you. I'll talk just a minute about the American Red Cross program, because our program is an IHL dissemination program. And so we go throughout the United States using a network of some amazing volunteers who learn about IHL and then go out and talk about it in their community. The American Red Cross work is done through 95% volunteers, and there's very few organizations in America that I think can say that. It's one of the things we're most proud of. One of which is our volunteer here, which Roberta Brown is my volunteer partner at the American Red Cross and is here also. And I have Molly Kovite here, who is our senior legal advisor on my team. So let me just start real quick. In the 1860s, it was during the American Civil War that Clara Barton saw a need to bring humanity to war. And upon conclusion of that war, she traveled to Europe, where she learned about the work of Henri Dunant and the fledgling ICRC. And upon her return to the United States, she worked for the next 15 years and through 3 American presidents to have the United States join the American Red Cross movement. Now, there's a lot that I personally admire about Clara Barton, but one of the things that I admire most about her is her humility in understanding that the United States would be better to be part of something bigger, something international. And I think that aspect of recognizing that we can do more together, working international, is what I believe the IHL Dialogues and now the Roundtable is all about. And our Clara Barton Lecturer this year, Herman von Hebel, lived his life by that belief. So before getting into you, I will talk about Gregory Peterson. So last night, over a couple of gin and tonics, which I always said was dangerous to have a conversation that you want to repeat in public over gin and tonics. But we had gotten back from the Jackson Center, and we were talking about that we think that Robert Jackson and the others that worked on the Nuremberg court realized that with a real appreciation that what they were doing was living history, was making history. And I think our conclusion was, at some point, sometimes they probably did. But for the other times, it was just sort of the day-to-day, long hours, the grind, the being away from family that you do when you work on any international court, and they didn't really appreciate it. I had the same thought about Herman's career, and I asked myself the same thing, because over the past 2 decades, he has served not only as a witness to history, but a maker of history. A legal advisor to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 9 years, he participated in the negotiations leading to the creation of the ICC. He chaired the working group on the war crimes during the 1998 Rome Conference, and subsequently chaired the UN working group on the elements of crimes for the ICC crimes. Then, from 2001 to 2006, he served as a senior legal officer in the Chamber of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Then from 2006 to 2009, he was a deputy registrar for the Special Court for Sierra Leone, followed by deputy registrar for the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. Then in March of 2013, he was elected as a registrar for the International Criminal Court, only recently concluding his 5-year term with the court. Now, these jobs not only involved long hours, but several of them involved months that added up to years away from family. something that many of you here have experienced, and that I think we're all grateful for those of you who have. As someone who served a long time in the U.S. Army, I've gotten used to people saying thank you for your service, but let me say thank you for your service. For all of you who spent time away from home, Herman, you especially, but the others in here, thank you for your service. At this point in his life, now Herman serves as an independent consultant on issues of rule of law. He's also worked and published extensively on issues of rule of law, human rights, international humanitarian law, criminal law, and the creation and function of international courts and tribunals. Thank you very much for agreeing to be our Clara Barton Lecture this year, and I'd like to welcome you to the podium.
Well, thanks very much. It's a great honor to be here, and thanks for the beautiful introduction. I was a bit worried that after the gin tonics, you also started talking to Jim in order to get the real story about my life, but thankfully you did not, or at least you got it out of your introduction this evening. Great pleasure to be here, and I think I have to apologize now also to Jim and Layla, because a number of the elements that I was, Layla over there, Jim over there, we had this fantastic, very vivid discussion this afternoon on the porch. And while we're having those discussions, I actually realized, hey, there's a lot of stuff that actually I prepared for this evening to talk about. So I already gave away a bit of my thoughts on international justice and what may be the future and the shortcomings of international justice. So there might be a bit of a repetition for those who are participating in that, but I'll try to sort of keep it alive as possible. And let me start off by also saying that I certainly do not pretend I have the golden key on what the future of international justice is going to be or may be. The only thing that I'm doing is providing some food for thought. People may agree or disagree, but it's a basis for further discussions, and hopefully it will assist in all of you to further catch up on what the future of the ICC, but international justice in general, may be. Let me start by having a bit of a small anecdote. You were talking about the fact that I spent 9 years at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Holland. I joined in September 1991, and the very first assignment I got was from the then legal advisor of the ministry. And he said, Herman, I have to go to New York in next month, and I have to do a speech in the Sixth Committee, and there's this topic about the draft Code of Crimes by the International Law Commission, and of course also draft statute for an ICC. So can you prepare me a speech? So I thought, well, it's an interesting topic. So, young lawyer, enthusiastic. So I really wrote a fantastic speech for him about how important it is, and we really have to get an ICC established and all these kind of things. So I sent a text, and then for a few days I didn't hear anything from him, so I got a bit worried. But then he came into my office, he sat down, and he said, Herman, you know what, let's be realistic over here. This topic has been on the agenda of the UN since basically the UN got started, and it will be on the agenda of the UN for many years to come. So, you know what, yes, we pay lip service to the need for the creation of an ICC, but you know what, it won't happen. That was 1991. Well, then 2 years later, we had the establishment of the ICTY, Rwanda Tribunal, 94. And the very same boss that told me that story that it would never happen became the chair of the ad hoc committee in New York for the discussion on the creation of, is the time right for the creation of an ICC, Adrian Boss. And then from that on, he continued to be the chair up to the Rome conference, where due to health reasons, he was unfortunately not able to be there. But the reason why I bring out this anecdote is about how times can change from something of years of practical experience from him, sort of, these kind of things, they're on the agenda, but it's not going to happen. You know what, and probably now we see ourselves going in a different direction, in the sense that, what happened at that time, I think we wouldn't be able to do the same thing today. If there would be no ICC today, I would have the very same question on the table in the UN, is time right for the creation of an ICC? I think the majority would say immediately, no, it's not. And I think that is an important message in terms of, let's be careful what we have. Let's make sure that we preserve what we have. It may not be perfect, and we all know it's not perfect, but the bottom line is let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Make sure that we may want to, refresh the water a bit, but let's make sure that we preserve the baby because it's a very precious baby as such. That I think is the background, and that has driven me always since then in terms of working in the different tribunals and including, of course, also the ICC. So where do we stand today? We have a totally different political situation. The trust, and we also discussed it this afternoon, the trust in international institutions, the trust in international law is not there anymore. Presidents can walk out of Paris Accords, Iran deals, ICC statutes. Whenever it serves them right, they feel like, we can join in, but we can also walk out if it is good for our own political interest. So the whole idea, international law is there to function for the entire community, world community, is not there with a number of political leaders. And that, of course, is worrying. And, of course, also for the ICC is very worrying. So the whole idea about multilateralism is in decline. It's more about, bilateral deals, more about economic interest, short-term economic interest. And at the same time, also, if we look at the UN today, Security Council, another topic that we discussed this afternoon, we see there is no support from the Security Council for any referrals to the ICC for Syria, for Myanmar, for other cases where everyone around here in this room and many people outside do know these are cases for which the ICC actually was established. If there's one situation since the creation of the ICC for which it was meant to function, it was for Syria. Let's be clear about it. And it doesn't function there. And there's a big shortcoming, of course, of the system. It is not a shortcoming of the ICC. It's a shortcoming of the system as such. And I think the only thing that binds, the Russia, China, and the US in the Security Council, of course, they have many disputes, but the only thing that binds them is their aversion towards international justice. And unfortunately, that's the only thing that they have in common these days. But of course, it's not good for the functioning of the ICC. Then let's move on to the ICC. Where does the ICC stand today? And I must say I was very impressed with the speech by Fatou this afternoon here, where she actually said, if we look at our track record, then I, as prosecutor of the ICC, I recognize we can and should do more. What has happened so far is simply not enough. Let's have a quick look at the track record. We have so far 4 convictions. ICC has been in function for 17 years. 4 convictions, of which 1 may still be in appeal. We have 4 acquittals, of which 2 may also be subject to appeal. We have 2 non-confirmations of indictments, 3 cases that have been withdrawn or terminated. We have now 3 people in pre-trial, still subject to confirmation of indictments, 1 person in trial, and we have a total of 15 people at large that have been indicted by the court, some of them already for many, many years, but are still not in The Hague. At the same time, the prosecutor is working on 10 preliminary examinations and 11 investigations. So there's a lot of work that is ongoing, but the total track record, what we have seen so far after 17 years of work, is simply not enough. And then, I think we can all agree with Fatou saying, we can and must do better, and we can and must do more. But at the same time, I think, and that is also the discussion we had this afternoon, I think it is too simple to only look at those figures. Yes, the court has been there for 17 years. Yes, the budgets, if you add them up for all those 70 years, has been a huge amount of money. But I think the court is more than just only a couple of figures about convictions and acquittals. Let's also realize that in those 17 years as well, we have seen thousands of victims who have been participating in proceedings. The victim participation system in the ICC statute is unique. And every single victim that participated, they may have sometimes their own views and concerns about the length of proceedings and whatever. But every single victim is an expression of hope, of delivering, of getting justice delivered to them. And that's why they have participated. And so let's not forget about the voice of the victims in those proceedings. In addition to that, we often forget about it, but also the Trust Fund for Victims is an integral part of the ICC. They sometimes don't think so themselves, and I'll get back to that later. But the Trust Fund is an integral part, and through their programs, they have actually been reaching out to more than 100,000 victims of crimes in those countries where the court has been active. That is a huge, huge positive impact. And I've seen, when I was working for the ICC, I've seen a number of those projects being operating in Uganda and Eastern Congo. And it's truly amazing what they do. And every one of the victims that have been assisted in all kinds of programs are truly, amazed and impressed by the work that the Trust Fund has been doing. It's part of the Rome Statute system, and we should not forget about that. And then also, I think through outreach programs, I'm the first one to recognize that the ICC should do more about outreach. Outreach you can never do enough. But through all the different outreach projects in the different countries, also more than hundreds of thousands of people have been reached out to, do know about what international justice means. These are also part of the figures that we should take into account when we make a total assessment of the functioning of the court. Let's then look a bit at about the major players in the total assessment of what the court is about, what has it achieved, the strengths, the weaknesses, the shortcomings, the achievements, etc. And of course, there are two major players here. On the one hand, the states out there. On the other hand, the court itself. Let's start with the states. Non-states parties first. We all know about the work of the position of the US at this very moment towards the court. Support is not the first thing that springs to mind there. There are some challenges, let's put it that way. But let's also not forget that, under the previous government, and I see Stephen Rapp sitting over there, the amount of support from the US towards the ICC has been enormous, And I've been regularly saying, and in Fatu as well, there have sometimes been more support coming out from non-state parties than from a number of states parties, and in particular the US is meant by that. Unfortunately, the situation is completely different at the moment. That's also why Fatu, unfortunately, is not here today. And that is very unfortunate, and hopefully times will change. Of course, also, and I mentioned it before, also other countries, Security Council, but many countries out there, at the moment 122 states parties. Do we expect any new ratifications in the foreseeable future? Probably not, unfortunately. But we're far away from universal recognition of the ICC statute. At the same time, a lot of criticism about it. Russia, I mentioned already, China, but also India, Indonesia. There's no movement in that way in terms of support for the ICC. But also on the states party side, the picture is quite mixed. States parties actually have two roles to play. On the one hand, the support to the ICC system. On the other hand, an element of governance, an element of control over the functioning of the court. And I must say that balance has not really been there. It has been a bit out of balance. I think the support, to be very blunt, the support has not been enough, and the control has been way too much. And I'll get to that in a minute. When it comes down to support, we're talking about judicial cooperation. 15 outstanding arrest warrants for such a long period of time. That is, the ICC doesn't have a police force. The court, I was about to say we, but the court is dependent on the support and the police actions of states. Those 15 arrest warrants is a shame for the states parties for not having implemented it for a long time. We've seen it in particular, of course, with the travels of Mr. Bashir to different countries in the world. where, states parties, also non-states parties, but states parties, could always be on top of it, sending messages to the countries where Mr. Bashir was traveling to, do picking up, do bring him over to The Hague, no response to these kind of requests. Beyond the control of the court, but it does have an impact, of course, on the reputation of the court. But also in issues like where I was very much involved in enforcement of sentences agreements, witness relocation agreements. A lot of states, or a number of states, who have been very vocal about the public showing of support for the court, are much less vocal when it came down to the willingness to enter into witness relocation agreements. It was actually quite interesting that in those 5 years that I was at the ICC, we managed to get a lot of agreements in place with countries who were much less vocal about the support to the court, but actually did agree with witness relocation agreements. It's quite interesting element there. But still, the number of countries that are willing to provide witness protection is limited. The number of states that are willing to take someone on board who has been convicted by the court is limited. And that is part of the judicial cooperation aspects, where you think, states, you could have done a bit more, and states, you should do more. Also on the political cooperation, 2 states have been withdrawing, Burundi and Philippines. We already discussed it today, simply out of self-serving interest of the leaders of those countries. Just throw the ICC statute out of the window and you feel you're safe. The number of African countries that continue to be critical about the court, discussions going back in South Africa anytime soon again about whether or not to pass legislation about the withdrawal from the ICC statute. But then also even among states that have shown for years to be strong supporters of the court, over the last 2 to 3 years, you've actually seen a fatigue amongst them. Whenever budget discussions were coming up, we're always asking for too much money, and how can I defend that back home? And, international justice is on its way down. There's other topics that are important for us. You actually have seen an increasing fatigue towards the ICC, towards international justice. It's not a good development. And of course, these are things beyond the control of the court, but of course do have an impact on the way the court is able to perform. But also an element of what I call institutional cooperation. Election of judges is one of those examples, and we discussed it this afternoon. I will get back to that a bit later. But one aspect that is very important is the yearly adoption of a budget for the court. We're talking about, over the last couple of years, 140, 150 million euros. And you can say, on the one hand, it is too much money to justify and to support the track record of the court. But at the same time, in my view, it's not enough money to really, for the court to be able to change that track record. Because the resources are not enough. We discussed it this afternoon as well. It's not enough for a prosecutor to have sufficient investigators doing proper investigations in the situations where they need to do investigation. We had a figure example. On the average, the prosecutor is able to have for each and every investigation between 10 to 15 investigators. And that is, for example, Eastern DRC. Huge part of the country, lawlessness, very difficult to do your investigation. How can you, with 14, 15 investigators, really bring about and develop strong cases against potential accused persons? Every national legal system, if you have a big case, then you have, for any major killing case, or, coming from Holland, MH17, the downing of the plane in eastern Ukraine. Well, there were hundreds of investigators working on that case. There were dozens of prosecutors working on that case. The ICC, the prosecutor of the ICC, does not have those resources to take and to undertake proper investigations. The political reality, of course, is there is no possibility for an increase of the budget, but it does have an impact on the ability of a prosecutor, any prosecutor of the ICC, to really bring about strong cases that stand the scrutiny of the judges. Then also, the last aspect here is the element of control. When I heard Fatu saying this afternoon, well, I have to be here because I have my meetings with the Committee on Budget and Finance, I truly felt sorry for her. Having been working with the Committee on Budget, and Louise, you know that as well, working with the Committee on Budget and Finance is close to, inhuman and degrading treatment, I would say, I may file a lawsuit against it, but, it is painful, it is micromanagement, it is hundreds of questions in 2 weeks' time, and you provide answers and hundreds of pages and they don't read it, and so you come into meetings and you know that they haven't read it, didn't have the time for it, ask the same questions again. It is really a painful process, but it's the basis on which the states discuss their budgets, or our budget, or the court's budget later on. And then you sometimes had discussions with 40, 50 diplomats in The Hague around the table, and you're talking about maybe, let's take 10,000 out of that budget line, or 15,000 out of that budget line. The mere fact that 6, 7 court officials and 40, 50 diplomats were sitting in a room for 3 hours already cost more than the total saving of that 10 or 15,000 euros, I may sound critical and cynical about it, but that budget process was really out of control. And I've never compared to the other tribunals where, ACABQ is not necessarily always fun either, I recognize that. But the level of micromanagement and all that was really, truly, and continues really, truly to be a tough exercise. And that's also where I'm saying, control, yes, plenty of it, but support, well, could have been a bit more. Now moving to the court itself. First, of course, the judges and the judicial work over the last couple of years. There were already a couple of judgments that were discussed this morning. Afghanistan decision, the Bagwell and Blake O'Day decision, the Bemba Appeals Chamber decision. We don't have to go into the details now anymore, but these are cases that do not necessarily add to the credibility of the institution, and that's probably an understatement, which is a pity. Then on top of that, we know there's judges have filed a case in Geneva against the court for a pay raise. At a time when you know that the budget of the court will not increase, at a time when judicial activity is relatively low, at a time when there's already a lot of criticism about the functioning of the court, and that's probably not the right moment for judges to ask for a pay raise with probably retroactive effect for many years as well, which may lead to millions of extra costs. And some states parties I know have already indicated, even if the judges will win that case in Geneva, we will not up that budget with the same amount of money. So that basically means that the total capacity of the court to do investigations, to do prosecutions, to do witness protection will actually further diminish. I don't think that is the right message that judges should give to the public and to the public and community. Then, of course, moving to the prosecutor. I'll get back to the registry later on as well, so don't worry, no one is spared this evening. As we said before, simply not enough arrest warrants. The track record is simply not good enough. We recognize that all. We don't have to spend more time on that. It is a track record that is not convincing, and that there is a need to change that record. How to do that? That is difficult. It does require budgetary resources, but it is a recognition that what has been done so far, by objective means, but also in comparison, of course, to other courts and tribunals, it is not something that we can be too proud of. And I was very happy there again to hear Fatu this afternoon saying, hey, we are going to assess our working methods. We have to look into how we can do our work better. And I think that is actually necessary as well. And I think one of the issues, and we had a discussion this afternoon as well, is, if you do see the track record in terms of the number of acquittals, number of non-confirmations, and, there is an issue with the quality of the evidence that is being produced before and presented to the judges. There is a need to thoroughly look into the work procedures of the investigations teams and to see how they can really strengthen that. I'm hesitant to go too much into the detail because I'm not a prosecutor, I'm not an investigator, but comparing the working methods of the ICC compared to that of other courts and tribunals, there is a need to thoroughly look into that. Then the registry. It didn't make a good start, that is for sure. And when I came to the registry in 2013, the first thing I was confronted with was a letter from an NGO who basically, which was already sent to my predecessor 4 months before, which basically alleged that a staff member of the court in Kinshasa had actually sexually abused 3 women who were in their care because they were vulnerable witnesses in Kinshasa and had actually been sexual slaves during the war. And my predecessor had not done anything about it. The only documents that I got when I was asking about it was a huge binder by which 3 senior officials of the court were sending memos to each other why one was not as responsible as someone else was. And they were filing memos to each other, but I didn't find one piece of paper in that dossier as to what actually was done in relation to those 3 women. So what I did is I gave a phone call to Brenda over there and saying, Brenda, I have a problem over here and I need to have a very thorough investigation into this. I had an internal investigation, but there was too much publicity about it already, so an internal investigation was not enough. So I needed an outside expert, so Brenda with a team of 4 or 5 people did a thorough investigation, big report, was it 100 recommendations or something like that? And thankfully, one of the people in your team became the new head of that section, of the victims and witness section, and really implemented all of those recommendations. But it was a real poor state in which the registry was at that time. There were other incidents as well. At one point, I was called by one of the judges, won't mention any names, who said, Herman, I want to talk about this and that case, but can you please not bring your own lawyers because they are not on the right track on this and they advise you in the wrong way. So, you know what? If that is the kind of things that you get in the first 2 or 3 weeks working in the registry, you think, wait a minute, there's some problems over here. So I started a big reorganization. I know that I didn't make myself necessarily always very popular with that, but it was absolutely necessary. Is it perfect now? No, it's not. It will never be perfect. But at least it's much better than it used to be. And at least there's an element of a regaining of trust between the registry, the prosecutor, the registry, and judges. And so it has moved in the right direction, but I think there's still work to be done. Trust fund for victims, I mentioned it before. We often forget about that, but it is an integral part of the Rome Statute. The problem, I think, is that the trust fund itself, so everyone now presents it too much as being an NGO within the Rome Statute system. They're not part of the court. They want to use the resources of the court when their staff is traveling around, but they don't want to see the ICC plates on their cars because they don't want to be associated with the ICC. Well, that's a bit of a difficult one because you are the trust fund for victims of part of the Rome Statute, of the ICC statute. In addition to that, they sometimes be quite slow in the decision making towards, starting projects in particular countries. I think they started thinking about going to Kenya by the time the cases were withdrawn, which was probably a bit late. So there have been some shortcomings over there, but there's also some changes taking place over there. So all in all, if we look at the track record, there's room for improvement on all different sides, certainly also in comparison with other courts and tribunals. But it is also, let's be fair, it's a combination of inside factors and outside factors. Then the way forward. I think let's be realistic, and I mentioned that earlier today as well. You know what? The court has often been presented immediately since its start as the court is going to end impunity. Well, that's unrealistic. The court will never end impunity throughout the world. It's simply impossible. First, it's subsidiary, it's complementary system. States have the primary responsibility for that. But even if the court were to take that responsibility, the resources are not enough. The number of crimes committed all over the globe are so huge that no court will be able to ever really end impunity. The court can contribute to that, but it can't end it. So it's also, I think, to a certain extent, victim of its own, presentation of what it is supposed to do, and therefore gets criticism for, hey, you have not yet ended impunity. You told us 70 years ago, and you still haven't done it. I'm making a joke about it, but there is an element of raising too high expectations about what the court can deliver on. And I think it's good to be more realistic about your assessment, about what you can actually deliver, and also what you cannot deliver, and also be transparent about that as well. At the same time also, I think we always will recognize that the mere mandate of this court, given the crimes, given the positions of people that are responsible for the ordering or the commission of such crimes, the mandate will always be extremely complicated. That will not change. And there again, that is also beyond the control of the court, because it really depends on the cooperation of others to really make that happen. So maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then I really will wrap up. The way forward, then of course we recognize that at the moment in an era of populism, of lack of trust in international law, in international institutions, etc., it will be very difficult to really change the functioning of the court. The world out there is not very helpful for that court, and there's only so much that the court can do. But here again, I think that both for the court and for states, there are a number of things that they can do. As far as the states is concerned, I think they should have a very serious look at the election of judges. And I think there's a wide recognition that, and the court is not unique in that. Also, other international courts and tribunals, they have had their own challenges in terms of the composition and the quality of judges. At the ICC, that is certainly also a big issue, and I think states parties really have to carefully look at how to strengthen that election process. I don't think it's a question of the difference between what they call List A and List B, people with a criminal law background or an international legal background. There's some fantastic judges that are examples of both List A and List B, and there's some clearly less than fantastic examples on both sides as well. I think there is a need for a bigger role for the advisory committee on nominations. I think states should take the advice of the advisory committee more serious. They normally have a distinction between qualified and highly qualified. Well, that is UN speak. It basically, in reality, means that qualified is doubtful, and highly qualified is okay, they probably can do the job. And I think maybe it would be good for states to say, if my candidate that we put forward, if that person only gets a qualified, maybe we should withdraw our candidate, because it's probably not the level. I'm not sure how many states would immediately do that, but it might be something interesting to discuss with states. If you really want the best judges over there, and there's an independent advisory committee that does make that assessment, let's follow their advice. Also, I think it would be good for judges to be tested on other things than only their legal qualifications. If you are sitting as a judge in the court, you deal with witnesses that are victims of sexual crimes or other crimes. You need to have certain skill sets, soft skills, call them, to really make sure that you make that appearance of that witness in the courtroom a day in court that they deserve. and don't make any mistakes over there. There have been examples, not in relation to sexual crimes witnesses, but there have been examples of one or two judges actually started laughing about a particular witness because that judge did not believe that witness. Sorry, but you cannot do that. It's simply improper. It's unethical to do that. So these are kind of issues where I think you can test judges a bit more on that than simply only looking at the legal qualifications and then, qualified or highly qualified. Election of the next prosecutor, I think, is also an incredibly important thing. I know that the process already got started, but I think we really, given the enormous challenges of the court, I think the next prosecutor really has to be an outstanding person that will be able to face all those challenges that are out there. Is what we call in Holland a sheep with 5 legs. And we know that is a very rare phenomenon. I've never seen that one myself. But it is that kind of person that we really need because the challenges out there are really enormous. And I think there's also be a responsibility for states to focus more on their obligation to support the court. Less control, more support. For the ICC itself, I think for the judges, I think there's a need to have more self-discipline, to work more with their own internal working methods, ethics. We worked a couple of years ago, started working on key performance indicators. Jim knows all about that. That is a process that needs to go on. Look at the Blake O'Day case. The last witness for the prosecution was called, was it January last year? Only 2 months ago, we got a written decision by judges, or 1 month ago, on the no case to answer. So there's 18 months. In any other tribunal, there was 1 or 2 months. Let's set key performance indicators on that. No case to answer, you take a decision with 1 or 2 months. Other cases, judgments, 6 months maximum, you get a judgment out. Kosovo Specialist Chambers has put very ambitious deadlines in their statute. Let's use them also for the ICC. I think it would add to that credibility. Also for the prosecutor, I understand that Fatou is already working on that. Look at the working methods, see whether things can be changed. And I think also here, look at the cooperation between the registry and the prosecutor's office. There's still overlapping functions on both sides, witness protection people in one, witness protection people in the other. Let's see whether there can be more of an exchange of functions so that really every single person has a single responsibility to do. And last but not least, and we had this discussion this afternoon as well, I think it would be good to have a tenure for staff members at the court. If you work for, let's say, 7 years, 10 years or whatever, it's time to move on. You don't come in there and think, if I don't make it too much of a problem, I can get my pension out of here. Thankfully, the vast majority of people working at the court don't think in that way. There are, unfortunately, a few who do, and that does have an impact on the staff morale of others as well, So these kind of things may assist. I know it's very delicate proposal. It probably would only apply to new staff coming to the court. I think otherwise there would be a few hundred cases again in the ILO Admin Tribunal in Geneva. That might be a bit costly, but it is something that you may want to think of. So that is where, I think I've been talking too long. That's where a couple of reflections that I have. Of course, happy to answer any questions and also happy to see any further discussions tomorrow taking place. Thank you so much for your attention.